Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, where we take the topics from the Hindu and analyze them as per the demands of civil services examination. The topics of discussion are listed on your screen.
Now, moving to the first article of the day that has appeared in the Hindu on page 1, basically talks about the kangaroo courts. Now, this topic, though, can very well form a part of GS2 syllabus under the polity section, but can also be studied as a part of case study and the various ethical dilemmas that it highlights, as UPSC in the GS4 syllabus provides for the various ethical dilemmas that have been faced and mentions about the case studies on the above issues. We'll try to understand what case study can be suggested or what are the ethical issues that are emanating from this particular case. Now, the case relates to the issue of Pradeep, who was a diploma holder and married his then girlfriend, who was a botany graduate. The marriage was out of love and was duly accepted by their respective family. Despite this, their marriage was objected by the society, and accordingly, the kangaroo court delivered a verdict whereby it levied a fine of 25,000. The kangaroo court was organized by the head of Manya Karar community, which comprises approximately 200 households. Another thing to understand here is that in this case study, not only the parents were supportive of the marriage, but also both boy and girl belong to the same community. We'll now try to understand what are the various ethical issues that are involved in such a case. The ethical issues that are involved in this particular case study is the preference for social custom over rule of law. Now, every citizen in India enjoys fundamental right to life and personal liberty as provided by Article 21, which also includes right to choose one's life partner. No law of India or the central or the state government can deny this basic human right and impose fines which are based on personal preference. This is the first ethical issue that has been highlighted. The decision of the kangaroo court to levy fine of 25,000 on a poor family is not only illegal, but it is also inhuman and seeks to promote parallel judicial system. These parallel judicial systems are running across the country and enforces social law. The second ethical issue that can be highlighted is the violation of the social contract theory. As per the social contract theory, people live together in society in accordance with an agreement that establishes moral as well as political rules for the behavior. However, this does not allow any organization, for example the kangaroo court, or if we take the example of Khap Panchayats, to enforce their customs or practices which is against the will of the people or violates the tenets of fundamental rights. The third ethical issue that can be highlighted here is that officers of the law justifying social custom leads to denial of their duty. Now, there was also a case of denial of duty or conflict of interest in this case. Police officer did not cooperate with family in registering FIR and also on the other hand suggested to follow social customs. Now, this not only amounts to denial of duty but also result in enforcement of decisions of Khap Panchayat in an indirect manner, thereby again promoting the concept of parallel justice. And it also approves that legal process does not have enough weightage when compared to social norms and practices. Moving on to the next ethical issue, it highlights the existence of parallel system delivering verdicts. Despite having legal procedures and the system, people of the society still rely on the social verdicts of these Khap Panchayats or the kangaroo courts. And this further boosts their legitimacy and make them perpetual. At the last, it highlights the lack of humanity as just because the couple married as per their wishes and went against the approval of Khaps, the economic penalty was levied on the poor family. And to justify the cow verdict, in this case, the family had to sell their sole cow, which provided them with the livelihood measures, thus compelling the family to sell their sole source of income and highlights the inhuman act. With this, we have seen what were the various ethical issues that have emanated from this case study. A case study in this manner can very well be framed under the GS4 section, and we need to understand what can be the ethical issues that are involved. Moving on to the next article of the day that has appeared on the page 17 of the Hindu, basically talks about the issue of fertilizer subsidy for financial year 23, which is expected to rise to 2.3 to 2.5 lakh crore. Now, despite of the tremendous rise in the fertilizer subsidy, the Fertilizers Association of India has expressed concern that the fixed cost of urea has not been increased, affecting the viability of the urea plants, and also highlighted the fact that the industry is functioning on a very thin margin. Now, under the GS3 section, the topic about subsidies has been mentioned, and thus this becomes important part from our mains as well as prelims perspective, as UPSC has asked questions both in prelims as well as mains in the previous years. During our discussion, we'll try to understand what basically is fertilizers. We'll also try to understand various types of fertilizers, that is organic and inorganic. Secondly, we'll also try to understand what is the present state of fertilizer industry in India. When we'll move in our discussion, we'll try to understand the fertilizer subsidy regime in India at present for urea and non-urea based fertilizers, how the prices are inferred to. Then we'll move towards the various challenges that the fertilizer industry currently faces. And at last, we'll also try to find out the way forward for the fertilizer industry, wherein we'll discuss the immediate, mid-term and the long-term measures to solve the problem of fertilizer industry and ensure its optimum contribution. Now, before starting our discussion on the types of fertilizers, we'll first try to understand what basically fertilizers are. Fertilizers are basically the substance which might be organic or inorganic and can be natural or even artificial, and may supply one or more chemical elements that are basically required to ensure optimum plant growth. Now, fertilizers are particularly important for India because Indian soils are generally deficient in nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, and thus to ensure higher yields and to achieve the target of self-sufficiency in food grain, which in turn will lead to food security, there is a conscious need for fertilizer industry. Further, the fertilizers also help in achieving the operative efficiency, promoting effective use, and at the last it also promotes research and judicious consumption. Now, moving on to the types of fertilizers, fertilizers basically can be classified as organic or inorganic. Now, organic fertilizers can be further classified into biofertilizers and organic manure. The biofertilizers are the one which are composed of living organisms which are attached to solid or liquid carrier. For example, they can be rhizobium, azobacter, etc. Organic manure, on the other hand, are basically obtained from partially decomposed organic matter, like discharge from biogas plant or from compost or even from the techniques of vermicomposting. Next type of fertilizer is that of inorganic. Now, inorganic substances that are given for the support of soil to promote plant growth are produced partially or completely by synthetic processes, and they have inorganic substances. Meaning thereby, to promote plant growth, we require primary and secondary nutrients. Now, the primary nutrients can be classified as nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. On the other hand, secondary nutrients can be classified as boron, chlorine, copper, iron, and zinc. These nutrients are important to ensure healthy plant growth. Now that we have seen the classification of fertilizers and the need for fertilizer per se in general, we'll try to understand the status of Indian fertilizer industry. Now, India currently is the second largest consumer of fertilizers, and this consumption is bound to grow in the coming years. India currently is the second largest consumer of fertilizers and is only behind China. Another thing to point out here is that the Indian fertilizer industry or the demand has been growing at a compound annual growth rate of approximately 12%. The government pays a subsidy on the fertilizers such that to ensure availability to the farmers at affordable rates such that it does not compromises the availability as well as ensure the food security of the same while keeping the farming remunerative at the same point of time. Now government gives two types of subsidies under this, which is for the urea and other for the non-urea based fertilizers. We'll try to understand the urea based subsidy and the non-urea based subsidy now. For urea, the center pays the subsidy to the manufacturers on the basis of cost of production and the number of units required. Now, in this case, government fixes the MRP and this is done as per the new urea policy. For case of non-urea based fertilizers, the prices are fixed by the companies and the center pays flat per ton subsidy to ensure price at a reasonable level. For example, it gives in the case of DAP, that is diammonium phosphate, and also in the case of MOP, that is muriate of potash. And this principle is regulated by the nutrient based subsidy scheme of 2010. Now the prices or the subsidy to be given is decided by keeping in mind the level of international prices, the level of inventories, domestic prices, and also keeping in mind the exchange rate. The whole point behind the subsidy scheme was to ensure adequate supply of fertilizers to the farmers and to increase the consumption of phosphoric and potassium fertilizers so that the optimum balance of the NPK is attained and it's kept at a level of 4, 2 and 1. However, despite of the government initiatives, the fertilizer industry in India is facing from several challenges. We'll try to analyze what are the challenges faced by the fertilizer subsidy now. The Fertilizer Association of India or FAI has highlighted various challenges that is impinging the growth of fertilizer industry in India and also hampering the availability of fertilizers to the farmers. The first challenge that they highlighted is related to the urea. As per the Fertilizer Association of India, the fixed cost of urea units continues to be reimbursed based on the 2008-9 cost data. And they highlight that since then there has been steep increase in the cost of elements which remains unrecognized and unpaid under the existing policy. The second challenge that the Fertilizer Association of India highlights is the issue related to the payments. Now government starting from 2016 has switched to DBT method to transfer subsidies directly into the accounts. But it has been highlighted that the assurance of weekly payment of subsidy via DBT is not taking place due to budgetary constraints. Another challenge that has been highlighted by the fertilizer industry and the Fertilizer Association in particular is related to the P&K fertilizers. The import duties on the raw materials and the intermediate increases the cost of domestic manufacturing. This in turn makes them uncompetitive when compared to the imported end item and thus basically discourages the domestic development of the fertilizer sector in general. The second cause that they highlight is related to the subsidy rate. The subsidy rate is similar for domestic and imported potassium and phosphorus fertilizers, which is thus not providing any incentive for the domestic producers to make value addition or expand the level of production. The next issue that is highlighted, which is challenging the fertilizer industry, is related to the environment. Now, due to differential pricing policy for urea based and non-urea based fertilizers, it has led to rampant misuse and distortion of the NPK ratio from 4 to 1, and this imbalanced use of fertilizer nutrients has given rise to infertility in the soil and at the same time has led to contamination of the groundwater. Another challenge that the fertilizer industry is facing is with regard to the import dependence. There is a limitation of the indigenous resources which increases the dependence on the phosphatic and potash sector. And this is testified by the fact that India is the world's biggest potash importer. Another reason which was highlighted recently was the issue of Russia-Ukraine war and its impact on the global supply chain, which in turn has affected the fertilizer industry in India in particular. The impact that has been highlighted is that the Russian-Ukraine conflict is impacting the fertilizer supplies, which in turn affects the prices, as India is heavily dependent on imports for meeting its fertilizers raw material, for example that of natural gas, sulfur or rock phosphate, for which India is entirely dependent on foreign nations. It is also dependent on various intermediates like ammonia, sulfuric and phosphoric acid, and also for various end products like diammonium phosphate, potash and complex fertilizers, where the supply has been disrupted due to the war that is happening between Russia and Ukraine. Now that we have seen the challenges that the fertilizer industry in particularly is facing, we need to understand what can be the way forward such that the growth of Indian fertilizer industry in general and the availability of fertilizers to farmers in particular can be made more easier. The way forward can be suggested in three ways, that is, the immediate steps that need to be taken, the mid-term measures that need to be adopted, and also focusing at the same time on the long-term measures. The immediate measures that need to be taken leads to the taxation issue. Now, there is a need to address unfavorable taxation issue by exempting raw materials and the intermediates for potash and potassium fertilizers from various duty and reducing the rate of GST on ammonia and sulfuric acid. Further, as a part of immediate measure, there is a need to ensure adequate budget allocation to clear all outstanding dues of the past and meet the current requirements of the fertilizer industry. As a part of mid-term measure, there is a need to ensure the nutrient-based policy, that is NBS, for the urea also. Secondly, at the same time, there is a need to implement DBT in the true sense. As a part of long-term measures that needs to be adopted for the fertilizer industry to fully grow to its potential is to have a gradual shift towards the biofertilizers, which needs to be now adopted at large scale. And at the same time, there is also a need to ensure development of buffer stocks, and these buffer stocks needs to be developed in areas where there is high consumption. So in this article, we have seen what are fertilizers, what are the various types of fertilizers. We have also seen the condition of Indian industry and the various challenges that the fertilizer industry in India is facing. At the same time, we have also seen the set of measures, that is the immediate, mid-term and the long-term measures that needs to be adopted for the development of fertilizers industry. Moving on to the next article of the day that has featured in the Hindu, basically talks about the Yuan Wang 5, that is the Chinese naval vessel which has re-entered into the Indian Ocean region. Now, UPSC under the GS2 section and particularly under the international relations has a topic which has been mentioned as India and its neighborhood relations. Thus, our relation with Sri Lanka is particularly important, and the UPSC in the year 2022 mains has asked questions specifically related to Sri Lanka, and thus this area becomes important for us. During our discussion, we will try to understand why the Sri Lankan government have given the approval earlier in the August and now also. What are the Indian concerns with the presence of naval ship in the Indian Ocean region? At the same time, we will try to understand what are the various options that are available with India as a method of way forward while dealing with the Chinese presence in the Indian Ocean region. Now, in August also, the Yuan Wang 5 had entered into the Indian Ocean region. This time, it has re-entered the Indian Ocean region at a time when it was planned for a long-range missile test by India, and for which it has issued a NOTAM, that is Notice to the Airman, as a no-fly zone. The Yuan Wang 5 vessel has entered into the Indian Ocean region via the Sunda Strait. And it is that point of time which collides with India's, which raises suspicion in the mind of India. The first incidents of Chinese presence in the Indian Ocean region started way back in 2008 when, in the garb of anti-privacy operation, Chinese vessels entered into the Indian Ocean region for the first time, starting with the Gulf of Aden. After that, Chinese presence has been ever felt, and Chinese has established various dual-use ports and made partnership with countries like Sri Lanka, Pakistan and Myanmar, and has also launched its famous Belt and Road Initiative, which India says is nothing but a disguised string of pearls policy as propounded by the China. The first point of consideration here is why Sri Lankan government gave the approval for the Chinese port. Now Sri Lanka has bowed down to the financial and the strategic muscle of China, as the Hambantota port has been leased to China for a period of 99 years, as Sri Lanka has failed to generate revenue and repay loan from the impractical project. The second reason behind why that the Sri Lankan government has given the approval for docking of Chinese ship is the present Sri Lankan economic crisis. Now, the present Sri Lankan economic crisis is the worst economic crisis that has hit Sri Lanka in the recent time, and there is a willingness by the Chinese government to restructure infra loans that are given to Sri Lanka, which are necessary for Sri Lanka to reach out a bailout package with the IMF. And this will require keeping China on boards and to come out of the economic crisis that is present. The third reason behind Sri Lanka giving approval for the Chinese ship to dock in the Indian Ocean region or the Indian Ocean waters is that the decision makers are in the grip. The decision makers remain in Chinese grip, and crisis hit economy will require the support from the free flowing loans from the Beijing to boost investment that will give a flip to employment, and which ultimately will lead to drowsing of domestic anarchy that is prevalent in Sri Lanka and which was witnessed by the world in the recent times. Now that we have discussed why the Sri Lankan government has given the approval to the Chinese ship, we'll move our discussion on the India's concern regarding the docking of naval spy ship in Indian waters. Now, the first concern that India is having with the Chinese ship entering into the Indian naval waters is regard with the nature of the ship, that is of dual use. As the Yuan Wang family of naval vessels are primarily used for the Chinese missile forces and space program only. Secondly, India is also apprehended and concerned by the aerial reach of the ship. It is for the first time that a Chinese ship with such strategic capability has sailed close to the Indian water. The ship has a significant aerial reach of around 750 kilometers, which puts several ports of India, that is Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and that of Andhra Pradesh under the Chinese radar. That is, it will put them under continuous surveillance of China. The third cause for India's concern is with regard to the SEZ. China has also proposed a SEZ, that is the Special Economic Zone, around the Colombo port city. Currently, the Colombo port city or the Colombo port handles 60% of India's transshipment cargo, and thus it can jeopardize the India's economic interest. Further, India is also apprehensive of the fact that it may be a replication of the Hambantota incident at the Colombo port. As in 2014, the then Sri Lankan government has allowed Chinese nuclear submarine and warship to dock at the Hambantota port. Though India has gained significant public goodwill during the recent economic crisis of Sri Lanka, still the Sri Lankan decision makers remain in the Chinese grip and are particularly looking for the implementation of the Belt and Road Initiative and its complete formalization, which India fears is nothing but disguised form of Chinese string of pearls. Now that we have also discussed what are the India's concern regarding the docking of the naval ship in the Indian Ocean region, we should also suggest some of the way forward that India can adopt to tackle the problem of Chinese presence in the Indian Ocean region. The first way forward that can be suggested here is the medium of partnership. India has been one of the top lenders during the crisis year of the Sri Lanka. But India alone cannot match Chinese economic clout. And thus India needs to partner with like-minded countries who are also major creditors of Sri Lanka. For example, India can partner with countries like Japan, who is also a major creditor for Sri Lanka. Thus, a partnership between India and Japan can be utilized to counter Chinese economic clout. The second thing that India can do is to partner with the Quad countries. India can engage and partner with the Quad nations to ensure that rules-based order is maintained in the Indian Ocean region such that the region does not become an area of contention. Further, India should also take the advantage of dislodgement of pro-Chinese Rajpaksha government and focus on its own infrastructural projects and its timely delivery. For example, timely delivery of Kanke Sinturai port and also Trincomalee infrastructure project. Further, at the same time, India should try to counter Chinese string of pearls with its own necklace of diamonds strategy by aligning with like-minded countries like it has already done by partnering with the French logistic bases at the Reunion and Djibouti, and also at the same time progress on the indigenous initiatives like Changi Naval Base in Indonesia and also with Dukmu port located in Oman. Further, at the last, India should focus on the neighborhood first approach comprehensively and use multilateral platforms like BIMSTEC, SAARC, SAGAR to foray its interest in the region. Thus, with this we have seen what are the various initiatives that India can take to counter Chinese presence in the Indian Ocean region. And we have also seen in this article why Chinese government has given the approval and what are the various concerns of India. Moving on to the next article of the day that has appeared on the page 1 of the Hindu, basically talks about the first Indian and Central Asian countries meeting of national security advisors that was agreed upon in the Jan meeting which happened virtually between the countries of Central Asia and that of India. The countries have agreed to have a security chief meet on a regular basis. Now, Central Asian republics forms the part of India's extended neighborhood. And during the meeting, it was highlighted that the focus of situation in Afghanistan is to be observed minutely. And it was also agreed between the countries that Afghanistan should not become a place for safe haven. Now, during our discussion, we will try to understand the importance of Central Asian republics. We will first try to see where are these Central Asian republics located. We will try to understand the importance of the region, the great game that is happening in this region, the Indian efforts that have been taken in this regard, and India's engagement with the Central Asian republics. What are the various challenges that India faces in dealing with the Central Asian republics? And what can be the best possible way forward while dealing with these countries? The Central Asian republics, as we can see in the map, are located in this region and include the group of 5 countries, that is Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, which were formerly the part of USSR and became independent after the fall of USSR. Now let us try to understand the Central Asian countries a little deeper. The Central Asian countries, as we have seen, are a group of 5 countries. These countries are doubly landlocked, meaning thereby all 5 countries are doubly landlocked because their neighbors are also landlocked. And for these countries to integrate substantively with the world economy and to develop economically, they need to have access to the warm waters. Further, another important feature of these countries is that they are mineral rich. All the five countries are endowed with natural and mineral resources, and these countries have vast stretches of unexplored minerals, which includes uranium, oil, gas, and are important region for India's economic interest. These countries have also in the recent years have witnessed political stability. And throughout the 25 years of their independent existence, no major political instability have arisen. Another typical feature of this area is of extremism. There have been terrorist groups, however, the terrorist groups like Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, Hizb ut-Tahrir, and others are present in the Fargana Valley. They have not been very active or effective in spreading the disturbances. So it is observed that these five republics have been largely secular and liberal so far. Religious extremism, fundamentalism, and terrorism, though, pose serious challenge to the all society and the regional stability, and this becomes even more important due to the Taliban's resurgence in Afghanistan and spread over the countries in the region. Another important typical feature of the Central Asian countries is the drug trade and great game. Now, Central Asian republics face serious threat from the illegal drug trade, which is emanating from Afghanistan, and traditionally Central Asia has been an arena of great game. The modern version is being played out today between countries like Russia, China, US, Turkey, Iran, Europe, EU, Japan, Pakistan, India, and Afghanistan having substantial security and economic stakes in the region. So this brings us to the question that what basically is this great game? Or what is the great game in the Central Asia? Now Central Asian countries stretches from the Caspian Sea in the west to China and Mongolia in the east, and from Afghanistan and Iran in the south to Russia in the north, and were a part of earlier Soviet Union. The geopolitical scenario in this region is going a sea change. In the last few years, there have been radical transformation in the geopolitical front of Central Asia due to interplay of both global and regional forces and their subsequent impact on the region. Another area which can be highlighted is the recent takeover by Taliban over Afghanistan. This has renewed the focus of these republics to tackle the new challenging of rising extremism in the region. United States of America is also a player in this region, as United States of America hopes to use Central Asia as an important region in its Indo-Pacific strategy to counter both Russia as well as China. Russia considered this region as a backyard, as these were earlier the part of the USSR, and Russia still has a considerable leverage given the Soviet past. Further, the Central Asian countries or the republics are also crucial for China given the high level of economic engagement and the Chinese ambitious Belt and Road Initiative which passes through the region. China has been actively engaging in the region so far, and the bilateral trade between these countries and that of China amounts to close to $100 billion by now. So this brings us to the next set of questions, that what India has done so far in engagement with the Central Asian republics. Now India has adopted the policy of Connect Central Asia strategy. India has adopted Connect Central Asia strategy. Now the Connect Central Asia strategy of India is a very broad-based approach which includes dimensions like political, security, economic and cultural connection. India is also keen on establishing multilateral engagement with the Central Asian countries, whether it is joining the effort with regarding to SCO, that is Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or with regard to the Eurasian Economic Community and the Custom Union. Further, India looks at the Central Asia as a long-term energy partner. Further, India is also setting up a Central Asian e-network with its hub in India, and the objective behind this is to deliver tele-education, telemedicine connectivity, which is linking all the 5 countries of Central Asia. The second thing that India is doing in the Central Asian region is that of connectivity. India has reactivated the International North-South Transport Corridor, At the same time, India is also modernizing its infrastructure in the Chabahar port in Iran, which will form an important link in trade and transport communication between the markets of Central and South Asia. India also joined the Ashgabat Agreement as a part of its economic and humanitarian engagement with the Central Asian region. It has started India and Central Asia dialogue. India also provides humanitarian medical assistance, and such assistance was also seen during the COVID-19 pandemic. India has also provided line of credit, that is 1 billion line of credit was provided for priority development projects in field of IT, energy, healthcare and infrastructure development. Apart from this, India also engages with the region in other areas of cooperation, which includes cooperation in combating terrorism and facilitating robust exchange of students and regular exchange of scholars, academic and civil society between the two regions, so that deeper insights into the culture of each other can be developed. Despite of multifaceted approach that has been adopted by India, there are some still crucial challenges that India faces in this region. We will now try to understand what are the challenges that India faces in this region. The first challenge that India faces is with regard to the strategic concern. India has no direct connectivity with this region. Further, Afghanistan takeover of Taliban has severely altered India's strategic calculation in the region. China, on the other hand, has been intrusive in the region with its Belt and Road Initiative, and thus reduces the space for India to engage in the region. China has been expanding its regional presence as seen in 5+1 format, which was launched in 2020 to further its influence in the region. Now the launch of 5+1 format are causing concerns of debt trap diplomacy given the economic situation of Central Asian countries. This can be also utilized by India as an opportunity to engage with this region, but also showcases a typical fear of Chinese debt trap diplomacy as it was seen in the case of neighboring Sri Lanka. Russia also has considerable influence in this region. However, Russia has been promoting its own Eurasian and Economic Union to pursue its regional and economic integration with this region or with the erstwhile Soviet Union state to counter Chinese influence. Further, the connectivity projects in this region are not materializing. For example, the Chabahar port cannot be completed or is not operationalized up to full extent due to the US sanctions that were imposed on Iran. The international north-south transport corridor has witnessed slow growth due to combination of factors which include low trade volumes, incomplete infrastructure and various sanctions that have been imposed. Further, the India and Central Asian Republic has also shared limited economic partnership, and India has been a latecomer to this region and has turned its attention to the region only in the recent years. India's total trade with this region amounts to just $2 billion, and as we have seen in the earlier part of our discussion, this is less than 0.5% of India's total trade, and when compared to China, India's trade is minuscule as China's trade with the Central Asian region amounts to $100 billion. So this brings us to the question what India can do or what can be the way forward for India to engage with the Central Asian region. The way forward with the Central Asian region is that India needs to direct its investment to the region to reap economic benefits of strategic location of Central Asia. Secondly, India must increase its developmental and humanitarian aid to the region and promote closer people-to-people ties through education and knowledge transfer and effective using the soft skills of tourism, culture, cuisine, and promoting medical tourism and health. India needs to utilize the multilateral organizations like SCO, Eurasian Economic Union as to sustain its engagement on and to facilitate regular exchange of ideas. There is a need to ensure regular meeting with the leaders of the region at the highest political level. India needs to ensure operationalization of the connectivity projects such as Chabahar and International North-South Transport Corridor, along with giving a push to Ashgabat Agreement. India can very well utilize Shanghai Cooperation Organization as a crucial grouping that provide India strategic convergence with Russia, China on addressing new security challenges and enhancing infrastructural development projects and creating a network of oil and gas pipeline, which will not only benefit India but also benefit Central and the whole South Asian region per se. At last, India needs to deepen its partnership with regard to check the rise of extremism and the terrorist group, owing to the precarious situation that has emerged in Afghanistan. And thus, these are the slew of measures that India need to adopt with regard to Central Asian region or India's extended neighborhood. With this, we have seen what is the importance of the Central Asian region, what is the new great game that is happening there, what have been the Indian initiatives with regard to this region, what are the problems or the challenges that India faces while engaging with this region, and a way forward to ensure India's participation with its extended neighborhood becomes more fruitful.